Judge Sotomayor's story, Mr. President, is a classic American story about what is possible in our country through hard work. She grew up, in her own words, in modest and challenging circumstances, and she worked hard for every single thing she got. Many of you know her story. Her dad died when she was 9 years old, and her mom supported her and her brother by herself. Her mom was devoted to her children's education. In fact, her mom was so devoted to her education and her brother's education that she actually saved every penny she could so that she could buy Encyclopedia Britannicas for her kids. This really meant a lot to me. I remember growing up, the Encyclopedia Britannicas in the hallway were like in a hallowed place, that these were the Encyclopedia Britannicas. I now show my daughter, who's 14, and these, of course, encyclopedias are now from the 1960s. She doesn't seem very interested in them, but they meant a lot to our family, and they clearly meant a lot to Judge Sotomayor. Judge Sotomayor graduated from Princeton summa cum laude and Phi Beta Kappa, and was one of 2 people to win the highest award that Princeton gives to undergraduates. She went on to Yale Law School, which launched a 3-decades-long career in the law. So when commentators have questioned whether she was smart enough, I'm like, you can't make this up. You can't make up Phi Beta Kappa. You can't make up that you have these high awards and that you're summa cum laude, Phi Beta Kappa. These are facts. These are facts. They're facts that should go into evidence. Since graduating, the judge has a varied and interesting legal career. She's worked as a private sector, as a civil litigator. She's been a district court and an appellate court judge, and she's taught law school classes. But the one experience of hers that particularly resonates for me is that immediately graduating from law school, she spent 5 years as a prosecutor at the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, which was one of the busiest and most well-thought-of prosecutors' offices in our country. At the time, it paid about half as much as a job in the private sector, but she wanted the challenge and the trial experience, as she told me when we met, and she took the job as a prosecutor. Before I entered the Senate, Mr. President, I was a prosecutor, managed an office of about 400 people in Minnesota, our biggest prosecutor office in our state. So I was very interested in this experience that we had in common. One of the things that I learned, and I really quickly learned that she understood based on our discussions, is that as a prosecutor, the law is not just some dusty book in your basement. After you've interacted with victims of crime, after you've seen the damage that crime can do to a community, the havoc that it can wreak, after you have interacted with defendants who are going to prison and you've seen their families sitting there in the courtroom, you know that law is not just an abstract subject. You see that the law has a real impact on real people. As a prosecutor, you don't just have to know the law, you have to know people. You have to know human nature. Ms. Sotomayor's former supervisor, Hugh Moe, said that she was an imposing and commanding figure in the courtroom who would weave together a complex set of facts, enforce the law, and never lose sight of whom she was fighting for. And of course, she was fighting for the people in those neighborhoods. She was fighting for the victims of crime. Judge Sotomayor's experience as a prosecutor tells me that she meets one of my criteria for Supreme Court nominee. I'm looking for someone who deeply appreciates the power and the impact that laws have and that the criminal justice system has on real people's lives. From her first day at the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, Judge Sotomayor learned that the law is not just an abstraction. In addition to her work as a prosecutor, I've also learned a lot about Judge Sotomayor from her long record as a judge. She has been a judge for 17 years, 11 years as an appellate judge, and 6 years as a trial judge. President George H.W. Bush, the first President Bush, gave her the first job she had as a federal judge. So she was actually nominated by a Republican president. The job was to be a district judge in the Southern District of New York. Her nomination to the Southern District was enthusiastically supported by both New York senators, Democratic Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan and Republican Senator Alphonse D'Amato. Now, if you watch TV or read newspapers or blogs, you know that Judge Sotomayor has been called some names. This always happens in these Supreme Court nomination processes. She has been called names by talking heads on TV and on radio. And in most cases, these commentators may have read a case or two of hers, or even worse, they just read a speech and took a sentence or so out of context. And they've decided that they are entitled to make a sweeping judgment about her judicial fitness based on a few words that have been taken out of context. I think just about everything in a nominee's professional record is fair game to consider. After all, we're obligated to determine whether to confirm someone to an incredibly important position with lifetime tenure. That's a constitutional duty that I take very seriously. But that said, when people get upset about a few items in a few speeches that a judge has given, I have to wonder, do a few statements that someone's made in public, for which they said they could have used different words, do those trump 17 years of modest, reasoned, careful judicial decision-making? I don't think so. If we want to know what kind of a justice she'll be, isn't our best evidence to look at the type of judge she's already been? Here are the facts. As a trial judge, Judge Sotomayor presided over roughly 450 cases. On the Second Circuit, she's participated in more than 3,000 panel decisions. She's authored more than 200 appellate opinions. And in cases where Judge Sotomayor and at least one Republican-appointed judge sat on a three-judge panel, Judge Sotomayor and the Republican-appointed judge agreed 95% of the time, as I mentioned. The Supreme Court has only reviewed 5 cases where she authored the decision, and it affirmed the decision below in 2 of them. So the vast majority of her cases, have not been in any way overturned or reversed by a higher court. It's worth noting that this nominee, if confirmed, would bring more federal judicial experience to the Supreme Court than any justice in 100 years.